Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, we know that Ebola has certainly become an issue that's been brought to the fore in 2014. But Professor, you're saying, and of course rightly so, that this is not a new problem for Africa. Won't you explain, in your opinion, why Ebola hasn't been so big an issue or so talked about an issue before 2014?
Well, what has happened, as I said, we all know that Ebola has been diagnosed in Congo since 1976. At that time, because the technology was not up to at the point where we had treatment for viral diseases. But since the 1980s, the technology has been available, for example, to sequence the Ebola genome and then to find new drugs. However, what has happened is that because this type of diseases included in the list of what we will make, it's not officially included in the list, but it can be considered a neglected tropical disease, which affects only the poor and vulnerable, especially those people in the interior of Africa. Because of this, such disorders, including Ebola, have been ignored by the international scientific community, as well as the drug manufacturing companies, because there is no, it's not commercially viable to find drugs, which, actually, have impact on the disease of poor people. And this is part of the problem that we have with Ebola virus and the, general neglect of diseases affecting people, diseases of the poor people, so to speak.
Now, Professor, you're also of the opinion that as Africans, we could have responded quite differently to the Ebola outbreak. In fact, you say that the principle of Ubuntu could have been implemented in these situations where there are people who need to be cared for and treated. And it extends further, I think, than Ebola. It extends to many of the tropical diseases that we see on the continent. Won't you explain this thinking to us?
Well, the concept is this. Africans have always waited for the international community to take care of problems affecting Africans. What we are advocating is that based on the principle of Ubuntu, which talks about African brotherhood, in other words, that we have to be our brother's keeper, that Africans should generally take the lead in looking at these diseases, including Ebola and other neglected tropical diseases. We cannot, for example, according to Professor Metz at the recently concluded Africa Health Congress, which we had in Johannesburg last week, the African Union, for example, contributed only $1 million to the fight against Ebola virus compared to the $1 billion which has been contributed by the international community, which shows that Africans are not taking the lead in actually trying to defend Africa against diseases affecting African peoples. Therefore, in terms of looking at it from the concept of Ubuntu, which talks about African brotherhood, and that we are because we can only be successful if we all succeed, if we all take care of each other. Therefore, we should use the African philosophy of Ubuntu and African brotherhood to take the lead when we are dealing with diseases affecting African peoples. That way, we don't have to wait for the international community to first of all take the lead in diseases that actually affect us as Africans.
Professor, what about the person who says to you, but Africa just simply doesn't have the capacity to put as many funds or as much effort in as the international community does? Do you accept that argument?
Well, we know we have problems in Africa. They also have problems in other parts of the world. But the members, African heads of state, for example, made a declaration at Abuja in 2000, where they pledged to invest up to 10% of their national GDPs on healthcare. In other words, when they are budgeting, they will budget at least 10% of their of the available monies. But most African countries, if not all, have been able to comply with this. They are still dealing with 2%, 1%, 5%, in some cases even going backwards. Therefore, even if we don't have enough to go around in all this thing, we should at least try to fulfill the pledges which we have made in order to help eradicate. Because the implications of this is this. If people are healthy, if we can treat diseases of the poor, neglected tropical diseases that we'll talk about at the conference include things like hookworm, ascariasis, leprosy, and basic diseases that actually some of the medications are already available. Now, if we can actually eradicate some of these diseases, we'll find out that, for example, somebody who has hookworm loses a lot of blood and they're always tired. Therefore, it impacts on their productivity. These are people people in the rural areas who need to go to farm. Because they are tired and because they are not healthy, their productivity is decreased. Therefore, investing in healthcare, even if we allocate 10%, it actually will generally improve African productivity because people will not be more healthy, they will be work harder, and therefore it's actually an investment in the progress of Africa. So we should not look at it in terms of just the question of health. We should look at it in terms of improving African productivity and the, and the quality of life for Africans. That's what we are talking about.
It's certainly interesting to note that and realizing that an investment in healthcare on the continent really means better productivity and presumably more goods and services being offered, which is something that we often speak about wanting. So as a concerned African citizen on the ground, perhaps I'm in business or even academia, what do I do? Do I lobby my government to say, hey, as Africans, we need to be doing more? What can I do as the concerned citizen watching this video?
Well, we actually had, an individual who attended our recent conference in the 5th Ethics Human Rights Medical Law Conference at the Africa Health Congress, and they asked that specific question: can you help us to help? What do we do? Just the way you have put it. What we said is that what the purpose of this conference and the purpose of interviews such as this is to empower people to actually ask the people in authority. In other words, you have to speak to your legislator, you write to your members of parliament and tell them that these are some of the things that we are concerned about, and we have learned that if you do this for us, for example, the quality of life, our productivity will improve, the quality of life will improve, and things like that. So we have to become more efficient in distributing, allocating our resources. We have to become more efficient in, for example, things that we can do. For example, simple acts such as making sure that children in schools are dewormed. For example, every 6 months they get a deworming medicine which will keep them healthy, keep them going to school, keep the people in the farms and things like that. So all those basic things that can be done should be done, and this requires every individual citizen who has the opportunity to speak to their legislature, or if you are involved in voting, you should vote for people who can actually do some of these things that will improve the quality of life for Africans. And that's basically what we're trying to do by conducting interviews, by having conferences, was enlightening the people to be able to make the right decisions and ask the right questions, and then as we move towards making progress in these areas.
And I think that's so helpful to us because we often are faced with almost overwhelming situations such as the Ebola outbreak on our continent and feel helpless, like there's nothing that we can do. But what you're telling us is that small steps go a long way if we all band together.
Yes, that's precisely what we are saying. We don't have to do everything at once. It's a step-by-step progress. In other words, we have to be moving in the right direction. First of all, those who are supposed to allocate the budget should look at it on a broader aspect in terms of when they are allocating the budget to say that, if we actually prove in these particular areas, if we allocate this budget to help, we can actually eventually improve productivity. Then those of us who are supposed to implement, for example, to actually implement and deliver the deliverables should be, we should be active in making sure that if we deliver what we're supposed to deliver, that we're actually making a general improvement. So talking about GDP, improving GDP and improving the quality of life is not just about, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a gradual process which starts with allocating budgets appropriately or resources appropriately, implementation, building up infrastructure, and that includes logistics and methods of delivery. And all these things will go a long way towards improving the quality of life of Africans. And that's how we should be looking at it.
Professor Chima, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.